Imagine trying to evacuate 2 million people, not a few hundred, but 2 million people from an active multi-nation war zone.
Right, and doing it using commercial airliners.
Exactly. Commercial airliners. I mean, you're dealing with bombed-out runways, restricted airspace, skyrocketing fuel costs, and skies that are just swarming with combat drones.
It's a complete logistical nightmare.
Yeah, but then a national leader steps up to the microphone and basically suggests sending planes to just pick them up. Like, comparing the logistics of this massive geopolitical crisis to, a domestic lockdown flight between two local cities.
Yeah, the contrast between the political promise and the brutal geopolitical reality in that scenario, it's staggering.
It really is.
And that collision, where performative crisis management just crashes into the unforgiving wall of actual logistics, that is the beating heart of the commentary we're unpacking today.
Which is why we're so glad you're joining us for another deep dive. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks for being here.
So, today's mission. We are looking at a highly charged, incredibly pointed political excerpt today. It's specifically aimed at Philippine Vice President Sara Duterte.
Right. And before we go any further, we need to make something perfectly clear to you, the listener.
Yes. Very important disclaimer here. Our job today isn't to play referee, okay? We're not declaring a winner, we're not taking any sides, and we are absolutely not validating or endorsing these political critiques.
Exactly. The source material features some heavy, heavy political commentary, but we are here as entirely impartial observers.
Right. We're just looking at the playbook. We want to know, how does a political pundit construct a rhetorical trap?
How do they use a mixture of philosophy, sarcasm, and logistical data to systematically dismantle a politician's platform on a public stage?
Yeah, that's what we're dissecting. Because the piece we're analyzing is an excerpt from a Philippine YouTube commentary show called Cuatro Alas,
which airs on PRTV Prime Media, just for context.
Right. And the primary voice driving this critique, the speaker we're going to be talking about a lot today, is a commentator referred to in the text as Sek Llamas, or Ronald Lamas.
And honestly, his approach here, it's kind of a masterclass in modern political punditry. I mean, regardless of your politics, rhetorically speaking, it's fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. Because he doesn't just attack the vice president's proposals directly. He goes after the underlying worldview that generated them.
Right. He builds this like a philosophical cage before he even introduces the main subject.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because how do we measure a leader during a crisis? Is it by their immediate actions or, their proposed policies? Or is it by the way their critics dissect every single word they say?
Well, Llamas starts by defining the very nature of a crisis. He doesn't start by complaining about oil prices or government inefficiency.
No, he goes philosophical.
He does. He cites his grandfather's teachings, actually, and he invokes that classic Mandarin linguistic trope, where the word for crisis, Ouija, is composed of two characters.
Right, representing danger and opportunity.
Exactly. And I mean, it's a well-worn rhetorical device, sure, but Llamas uses it with, surgical precision here.
Because he's establishing that a crisis is not just a mere administrative hurdle, it's a crucible.
Yes. He explicitly states that times of crisis are crucial because they, quote-unquote, define leaders.
And setting that bar artificially high right at the jump is such a brilliant strategic move.
Oh, it's completely intentional. Because think about it. If a crisis is framed as a simple logistical problem, then a leader's poor response is it's just a mundane administrative failure.
Yeah, like a bad day at the office. You fill out the wrong form.
Right, but by elevating the crisis to this ultimate existential test of character and competence, any misstep becomes a profound failure of leadership.
He builds the pedestal specifically to maximize the damage when he knocks the statue off of it.
That's a great way to put it. And the psychological framing here, it relies on the audience's innate understanding of pressure.
Because in times of prosperity or, relative calm, political leadership is largely about public relations.
Exactly. A politician can just read off a teleprompter, deploy some carefully crafted talking points, and rely on a vast apparatus of advisors to manage their image.
But a sudden crisis, like an international conflict or a global supply chain breakdown, strips that protective apparatus completely away.
It does. It leaves them totally exposed.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, though. It's like a pop quiz for a leader.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. Because a crisis reveals what a leader has actually internalized versus what they're just trying to cram at the last minute. Think about high-pressure situations in your own life or workplace. It's the classic corporate nightmare.
When the server crashes right before a launch.
Exactly. The primary server crashes during a massive product launch, and suddenly you see who actually knows how to code, who can triage a disaster, and who just knows how to format a nice PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, the crisis burns off the polish.
It really does. And Yamas is leveraging that exact dynamic, isn't he?
He absolutely is. He positions the current convergence of crises, so we're talking rising inflation, oil price spikes, Middle Eastern instability. He positions all that as the ultimate stress test,
And crucially, he appoints himself as the grader of this pop quiz.
which is such a power move. He announces to his audience that he has been, quote-unquote, impressed by the vice president's recent flurry of public appearances and proposed solutions.
Right, which brings us to the first of 3 specific solutions that he scrutinizes. And by the way, the word impressed is doing a lot of heavy lifting in his commentary there.
Oh, it's drenched in a thick layer of sarcasm.
Completely drenched. So, according to the source, the vice president allegedly advised the public to avoid carpooling and to stop riding bicycles during the ongoing oil crisis.
And why did she supposedly advise this?
Because, according to the text, they need to preserve energy.
Right. And Yamas just seizes on this with absolute glee. I mean, the text shows him highlighting this fundamental, almost cartoonish error.
The conflation of human physical energy with fossil fuel energy.
Exactly. Like, that pivot is so vital. He's signaling to you, the listener, that he doesn't need to construct an elaborate political attack.
Right, because the raw material provided by the leader is inherently devastating on its own.
Exactly. He instructs his audience to understand her and to dutifully save energy by abandoning their bicycles. He turns the alleged advice into a viral punchline.
Wait, let me push back on this a bit. Could
Yeah.
there be a lost in translation element here?
What do you mean?
I mean, we see this constantly in the modern media ecosystem. Is the commentator strictly framing this to highlight the absurdity? What if a politician speaks off the cuff for 45 minutes, awkwardly bridges 2 disparate thoughts, like maybe discussing fuel conservation in one breath and personal fatigue in the next, and boom, a 6-second supercut is born?
The out-of-context clip.
Yeah. By stripping away the context, Yamas might be manufacturing an absurdity that didn't exist in the full speech. Why should a listener take this critique seriously if it's based on a potentially bad faith framing of a gaffe?
That's a really fair question. But here's the thing. The critique Yamas is making isn't really about the empirical truth of her intention.
It's not.
No, it's about her vulnerability in the media ecosystem. Whether she genuinely conflated caloric energy with petroleum, or she suffered a moment of translation fatigue, or was maliciously clipped by political operatives. Yamas recognizes that the gaffe has already crystallized in the public consciousness.
Ah, so the damage is done regardless of the truth.
Exactly. In the brutal calculus of political commentary, explaining context is a losing game. If a leader has to spend a press conference explaining what they actually meant by preserve energy, they've already lost the news cycle.
Because in the age of rapid media consumption, a single awkward phrasing about energy completely overshadows actual policy discussions.
You nailed it. Yamas is exploiting the reality that a viral punchline will always beat a nuanced discussion about fuel deregulation or supply chain resilience.
Okay, so that covers the personal advice to citizens, but Yamas doesn't stop there, does he? He scales up.
He does. He moves from mocking personal advice to dismantling institutional strategy.
Right, because if treating physical exertion like gasoline consumption exposes a perceived misunderstanding of physics, her approach to the Department of Trade and Industry, the DTI, reveals what Yamas frames as a glaring misunderstanding of her own government's machinery.
Let's talk about that second proposal. The source outlines her alleged plan, the creation of a brand new, dedicated committee for price control to combat the rising cost of commodities.
Now, to a layman or, a citizen struggling to afford rice and cooking oil, announcing a special committee sounds like decisive action.
Oh, absolutely. It sounds like the government is taking the inflation crisis seriously enough to build a bespoke weapon to fight it.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the administrative redundancy here is wild. So what does this all mean?
Well,
It's essentially like hiring a brand new freelance mechanic to figure out why your car won't start, while entirely ignoring the full team of expert mechanics you already have on your payroll sitting in the garage.
that is the perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And that administrative redundancy is exactly what Yamas attacks. He points to her extensive resume, I mean, her years as a local mayor, her tenure in local government, and her current position as the second highest official in the republic.
Right.
His central argument is that someone with that level of embedded governmental experience should intimately know that monitoring, regulating, and controlling the prices of basic goods is already the fundamental statutory mandate of the Department of Trade and Industry.
The DTI already exists to do exactly this. The Philippines even has a specific law, the Price Act, which explicitly empowers the DTI and other existing agencies to implement price freezes during emergencies.
Exactly. The architecture to fight this crisis already exists. It has budgets, it has personnel, regional offices, legal authority, everything is there.
So Yamas views the proposal to build a new committee as not just redundant, but actually insulting to the intelligence of the electorate.
Yeah, he sarcastically brands it a quote-unquote brilliant proposal.
Yeah.
But the subtext is a devastating accusation of administrative ignorance.
Why do politicians love doing this, though? Like, globally? Why do they default to creating task forces or committees during a crisis?
It comes down to political optics. Relying on the grinding, slow-moving machinery of established bureaucracy doesn't generate thrilling headlines.
I guess you can't hold a televised press conference to announce we are allowing the DTI to continue executing its decades-old mandate.
Right. It totally lacks political theater. Creating a task force or a special envoy allows a politician to claim authorship of the solution. They want to appear to be taking immediate, bespoke action.
But Yamas just strips away that performative optic.
He does. He's essentially asking the audience, why would you trust a leader to navigate a complex economic crisis when they apparently don't even know which levers on the dashboard actually control the economy?
Wow. He uses the redundant committee as evidence of a hollow leadership style one that prioritizes PR stunts over substantive governance.
Exactly.
Okay, so a redundant committee might be a bureaucratic annoyance, right? It might waste taxpayer money and generate eye rolls from political scientists, but it is ultimately a low-stakes annoyance. The third proposal Yamas tackles, however, this one involves high-stakes international logistics and human lives.
This is where the critique gets incredibly serious. The source text dives into the crisis in the Middle East and the fate of overseas Filipino workers, or OFWs.
And to understand the gravity of Yamas's critique here, we really have to understand the sheer scale of the OFW phenomenon. This isn't just a small group of expats we're talking about.
Not at all. The Philippine economy is heavily reliant on the remittances sent back by millions of workers spread across the globe.
Right, and there's a massive concentration of them in the Middle East, working in construction, healthcare, domestic service, engineering.
So when instability rocks the Middle East, it isn't just a foreign policy abstraction for the Philippines. It is an immediate, agonizing domestic crisis.
Millions of families back home are terrified for their spouses, their parents, their children. The political pressure on the government to do something is unfathomable.
And according to the text, the vice president's alleged solution to this geopolitical powder keg was to suggest sending planes to the Middle East to repatriate the OFWs.
Just send planes.
Just send planes. And crucially, she allegedly anchored this proposal by comparing it to a past domestic success.
Right. The source claims she suggested using the exact same strategy they utilized during the COVID-19 pandemic,
where the government sent planes to Manila to pick up stranded residents of Davao, which is her political stronghold, and fly them safely home.
And Yamas just completely obliterates this comparison. He aggressively dismantles what rhetoricians call a false equivalence.
Because a domestic flight between two Philippine cities during a health lockdown involves coordinating with your own civil aviation authority, your own domestic airlines, and your own local governments.
It is a logistical challenge, certainly, but it operates entirely within an environment of absolute sovereign control. You own the airspace.
Exactly. To compare that to an extraction operation in an active Middle Eastern theater of war is, well, in Yama's view, dangerously naive.
The text shows him detailing the grim realities of this, right?
Yes. He points out the airspace is choked with thousands of combat drones actively searching for targets. You have fighter jets exchanging fire, anti-aircraft missiles, no-fly zones.
Airports that are literally being subjected to bombing campaigns.
And then he adds the economic layer, noting that the price of aviation fuel in the region has skyrocketed, multiplying by 4.
Which leads to his joke that only the taipans, the ultra-wealthy billionaires of the Philippines, could even afford to travel there, let alone charter commercial fleets.
Because commercial airlines will not fly into active missile zones. Their insurance policies are immediately voided. Pilots and crew will refuse the routes.
So you are no longer talking about a chartered commuter flight. You are talking about a highly complex, incredibly dangerous military extraction requiring diplomatic clearance from multiple warring nations.
And Yamas uses this devastating real-world parallel to expose the scale of the alleged disconnect here. He points out the Royal Air Force of Singapore.
Right, a highly advanced, well-funded military apparatus.
Exactly. They utilized their military transport planes to extract their citizens from the conflict zone, and they managed to successfully pull out exactly 24 people.
Just 24.
24. And Yamas immediately contrasts that tiny, hard-won victory with the reality of the Philippine diaspora. There are roughly 2 million OFWs in the Middle East.
He states it so plainly in the source. 24 is 24. 2 million is 2 million. That's a big difference.
It completely shatters the illusion of her proposal. Even if the Philippine government requisitioned every single commercial and military aircraft in the country, the sheer mathematics of moving 2 million people out of a war zone is an impossible fiction.
And then, as if the logistics weren't enough, Yamas introduces a psychological and economic nuance that makes the situation even more intractable: the issue of consent.
This is a crucial point. He brings up the historical precedents of the Libyan Civil War. During that conflict, the Philippine government actually did manage to send transport ships and planes to repatriate workers.
The significant portion of those OFWs refused to board. They said, "No thank you, we will stay here."
Right. And you might wonder, why on earth would someone choose to endure the terror of a civil war over a free flight back to safety?
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive, but it speaks to the brutal economic calculus of migrant work.
Many of these workers have taken on massive debt to secure their overseas placements.
Exactly. If they leave their jobs and return to the Philippines, they return to an economy that cannot absorb them. They face zero income, the inability to pay off their recruitment debts, and the devastating reality of watching their families starve.
They are literally weighing the risk of shrapnel against the absolute certainty of economic ruin.
It's heartbreaking, and by invoking the Libyan example, Yamas demonstrates this profound ground-level understanding of the OFW experience.
He contrasts his own grasp of this complex, tragic calculus with the vice president's allegedly simplistic top-down decree to just send planes.
He paints her as an official who thinks of the diaspora as cargo to be shipped, rather than complex human beings navigating impossible economic choices. But let me pose a critical question here. How do national leaders balance the desperate need to show action, like offering to send planes, with the grim, immovable realities of geopolitics and logistics? Because isn't Yamas demanding an impossible standard of political communication here?
That's a fascinating angle.
If a leader stands at a podium and delivers the brutal, unvarnished truth, we cannot physically evacuate 2 million people from a war zone, the logistics are impossible, and many of them wouldn't leave even if we could, they will be crucified by the media for being callous, weak, and abandoning their citizens.
Absolutely. The families of those workers demand the illusion of control.
Right. The promise to send planes buys a leader time. It demonstrates empathy, even if it's a logistical fantasy.
And that is the ultimate paradox of crisis leadership. The electorate demands absolute security in an inherently insecure world. Politicians frequently choose the comforting fantasy over the hard truth, because the political penalty for perceived inaction is immediate and severe.
So they're in a lose-lose situation.
In many ways, yes. But the problem for the vice president, as Yamas highlights, is that she presented a fantasy so easily dismantled by basic math that it looped back around from projecting strength to projecting incompetence.
Wow. So Yamas has thoroughly critiqued 3 proposals now: the energy preservation gaffe, the redundant DTI committee, and the war zone repatriation fantasy.
Methodically destroy them, really.
Yes, but then the source material takes a fascinating turn. It pulls back the camera. Yamas isn't just tearing these proposals down for the sake of current events.
Well, he is doing it to send a very specific warning about the future.
Because of the 2028 presidential elections. Having analyzed the specific policies, the source broadens the lens to the long-term political fallout.
The looming shadow over this entire analysis is 2028. Yamas explicitly puts the vice president on notice. The text quotes him saying, if you are applying to be president in 2028, you might need to fix your proposals because you will be hit hard.
He refers to the critics people like his co-hosts or other political commentators as nitpickers, adopting the English phrase.
He warns that these individuals possess zero generosity. They will scrutinize every syllable, every press release, and every policy suggestion.
Which confirms our earlier premise. Every response to a natural disaster or a geopolitical conflict is, in reality, a high-stakes, highly publicized job interview for the highest office in the land.
This raises an important question about the nature of permanent political campaigning. Yamas is fully aware of his own role in this ecosystem. He and his co-hosts aren't just passive observers documenting the news.
They are the unelected vetting committee.
Exactly. They position themselves not just as observers, but as the active judges who hold immense power to shape the public narrative years before a single ballot is cast.
They are actively molding the perception of the vice president's competence, laying down a narrative foundation that will be incredibly difficult for her campaign to uproot.
And this dynamic generates an incredibly revealing moment of banter between Llamas and the host of the Cuatro Alas show.
I noticed this dynamic too. It's fascinating. The host of the YouTube show plays the instigator, and Llamas plays the reluctant critic.
Right, so the host, playing the role of the provocateur, asks a blunt, dangerous question. Is Sec Llamas implying that the vice president simply, quote-unquote, doesn't use her brain?
Oh, wow, that's a direct trap.
It's a massive trap. But Llamas navigates it with a masterclass in rhetorical deflection.
Yeah.
If he says yes, he sounds like a crude partisan attacker, and he risks alienating moderate viewers.
So what does he do?
He immediately denies it. He says, no, that's not what I mean. But then, having established his innocence, he launches into a pseudoscientific joke.
The 10% brain myth.
Exactly. He claims that, according to science, humans only use about 10% of their brain capacity. And then he delivers the punchline. The problem is, some people only use 2% or 0%.
Oh, that is brutal. It is brilliant, devastating political theater. He delivers a profound insult, implying the leader is intellectually vacant, but he packages it safely inside a self-deprecating joke about human biology.
He accomplishes the assassination of her character while keeping his hands entirely clean.
Notice how he builds his own persona throughout this segment, too. The text repeatedly notes his use of self-deprecation.
Right. He scatters phrases like, I'm going to get in trouble for this, or I'm going to be ruined, or I'm going to look small compared to my co-host.
It's a highly calculated performance. He's playing the archetype of the reluctant but willing critic.
Yes. By constantly suggesting that his analysis is dangerous to his own career or reputation, he makes the critique feel more authentic, more courageous to the viewer.
Like, he isn't attacking her because he wants to. He's attacking her because the truth simply compels him to, despite the personal risks.
Which creates a powerful bond of trust with the audience.
But eventually, the performance of the critic must face a reckoning. Because it's easy to sit in a studio and destroy someone else's blueprints, right?
Very easy.
The host of the show essentially corners Llamas, demanding an alternative. If her proposals regarding the DTI and the Middle East are so fundamentally flawed, what is his grand vision? What does true crisis leadership look like to him?
And the final section of our source text shifts from deconstruction to construction. Llamas lays out his alternative.
And surprisingly, it doesn't involve complex administrative reforms or brilliant diplomatic maneuvers.
No, it relies on raw, populist political theater.
So he begins with a critique of systemic timing, arguing that true crisis management is about anticipation, not reaction, which, fair enough, crises should be prepared for in advance.
He chastises the government for waiting until a crisis is actively exploding before they begin to formulate a plan. But given that they are already deeply entrenched in the current economic shock, he offers his immediate solution.
Which is to summon the big players, the billionaires and tycoons, to Malacañang, the presidential palace.
Right. To fully understand this proposal, we need to look at the economic architecture of the Philippines, specifically regarding the energy sector, because he explicitly acknowledges the existence of a free market and mentions oil deregulation.
Right, the Downstream Oil Industry Deregulation Act from the late 90s.
Exactly, which stripped the government of its power to fix fuel prices, transitioning to a market-driven system. In a purely deregulated system, when global supply chains constrict and the price of crude oil skyrockets on the world market, the local corporations mathematically must pass those increased costs down to the consumer at the pump.
Right, it's just math. Llamas acknowledges this mathematical reality, but he argues that political leadership should refuse to accept it.
He favors soft power and political arm-twisting over bureaucratic committees. He wants the government to look these billionaires in the eye and apply heavy unspoken pressure.
The subtext of the conversation he envisions at the palace is basically, we, the government, control the regulatory environment. We control your tax audits. We approve your permits. We have a lot of ways to help you or hurt you in the future.
But right now, You are going to absorb the financial shock of this crisis, and you are not going to pass the burden on to the citizens.
It is a textbook example of political arm twisting. He isn't proposing a new law or a return to a subsidized market. He's proposing an appeal to corporate moral responsibility, wielding raw executive intimidation in the name of the public good.
And he anchors this entire strategy on a powerful moral principle, quoting the phrase, patriotism muna hindi pera. Patriotism first, not money.
Okay, but let me push back on Yama's alternative here. While patriotism over profit sounds incredible on a podium, is it actually a viable, sustainable economic strategy, or is it just a different flavor of performative political rhetoric?
That is the essential contradiction of populist commentary.
Right, because he just spent an hour accusing the vice president of performative solutions. You cannot force publicly traded corporations, whose legal and fiduciary obligations are to their shareholders, to hemorrhage millions of dollars indefinitely out of a vague sense of national loyalty.
It's true. History shows that relying on the voluntary moral sacrifice of corporations during a crisis is a losing bet.
If an oil company buys crude at a massive premium and is forced by political pressure to sell it at a loss, they will eventually go bankrupt, halt imports, and trigger massive fuel shortages that will cripple the economy far worse than inflation ever could.
Without invoking extreme emergency wartime powers to seize assets or legally mandate price freezes, which shatters the free market system entirely, a government cannot dictate corporate profit margins through guilt trips in the presidential palace.
So we have to ask you, the listener, to reflect on this. Think about corporate responsibility during global crises you've lived through. Do corporations actually step up out of patriotism, or does the consumer always end up paying the bill?
Ultimately, the consumer or the taxpayer always absorbs the cost of a global shock.
Which kind of reveals that the goal of the pundit isn't necessarily to provide a peer-reviewed, functional policy alternative.
No, the goal is to win the narrative. Yamas's pivot to this patriotism over profit argument is a masterstroke for his brand. It positions him perfectly as the champion of the working class.
He is fighting a two-front war here. On one side, against the perceived incompetence of the government bureaucracy, and on the other, against the insatiable greed of the corporate elite.
He casts himself as the sole voice of reason defending the common citizen. It is a meticulously constructed narrative arc, blending sharp logistical critique with broad populist appeal.
Designed specifically to shape the political weather ahead of the next major election.
Exactly.
Well, that brings us to the end of our journey on this deep dive. Let's do a quick recap. We started with the philosophical definition of a crisis, right? How framing it as an ultimate test sets a rhetorical trap demanding perfection.
Then we navigated the specific critiques. We examined the anatomy of the energy preservation gaffe and how the conflation of physical exertion with fossil fuels was weaponized through sarcasm.
From there, we looked at the redundant DTI committees, breaking down why leaders default to the performative optics of new task forces rather than relying on existing bureaucracy.
We took a deep dive into the staggering logistical realities of war zone repatriations, contrasting the fantasy of sending planes with the grim reality of drones and the complex economic choices of migrant workers.
We explored the looming shadow of the 2028 elections, looking at how critics use banter and self-deprecation to position themselves as the ultimate judges.
And finally, we unpacked Yama's alternative plea for corporate patriotism, exposing the deep tension between moral suasion and the unforgiving math of a free market.
So we want to leave you with a final lingering question to mull over. If a crisis acts as a magnifying glass on leadership, revealing true capabilities under pressure, how much of a politician's response is genuine, boots-on-the-ground problem-solving?
And how much is simply an opening act designed to appease the political nitpickers of the future?
Is genuine crisis management even possible anymore, or have we built an ecosystem where the only thing that matters is the quality of the performance? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the rhetoric you hear in the media, look past the punchlines, and we'll see you next time.